Offline mode works whether you're creating a brand new database from scratch or are working on changes to an existing database. If you're changing an existing database, you can import its schema into a database project so that data tools can automatically make sure your new objects are compatible with the existing database. That way, you have a high level of confidence that when you deploy the changes, everything will fit together as you intend. You can even create, edit, and debug both T-SQL and SQL-CLR code objects together in the same project. Schema Compare lets you compare your offline project with an existing database to make sure things stay in sync and consistent. And you can create snapshots of your project as development proceeds for comparison over time. So what I'm going to cover now is some of the features of offline development using SQL Server data tools, starting with how to create a new database project and importing an existing database. If you're creating a new database from scratch using the SQL Server data tools, you can simply create a new project using the SQL Server database project template in the SQL Server node of the New Project dialog box in Visual Studio. Then you can begin creating tables, views, code modules, and whatever else you need. Then deploy the database to a SQL Server instance. But what I'm going to do here is instead go with the scenario that we have an existing database that we need to modify, because that'll give us a head start with a project that starts out pre-populated with database objects. There are two ways that you can create a new database project based on an existing database using the data tools. First, you can create a new project using the SQL Server database project template, and then import the database objects from the existing database into that new project. Or you can use SQL Server Object Explorer and directly create a new database project from an existing database. In this case, Data Tools takes care of importing the database objects for you as part of creating the project. Either option ends up with essentially the same project, assuming you make similar choices during the import process. So which option you use doesn't matter all that much. Try both and see which you generally prefer. Now I'm going to create a new database project and import database objects from the Northwind database. The scenario is that you have to make some changes to the database, and this will help you write code that will be consistent with the existing database. So here I have Visual Studio open and ready to go. I'll go over to Object Explorer and expand the SQL Server node and my local instance that I want to connect to. And I'll drill down into Databases, and there's the Northwind database. So I'll right-click on that, and I'll select Create New Project. This opens up the Create New Project Import Database dialog box. Notice that the connection is pre-selected, again because I right-clicked on that database within Object Explorer. And now I can make various selections in order to guide the importation of that Northwind database. I'm going to name the target database Northwind Updates. And I'll just leave the default location. I want to go ahead and create a directory for the solution, so it'll create a subdirectory off of that location. And I'll leave the other options set to their default settings. But as you can see, I can add to source control if I had it installed with this version of Visual Studio. And I can select various options about what to import. This is a really important option right here, the folder structure. I happen to like the schema object type because then what it's going to do is create a folder structure within the project, one for each schema, and then subfolders for each object type that is contained within that schema. It's a nice way of organizing the different script files, the .sql files within the project. But if you just want to lump everything together, you can select none, or just put all schema objects all together in one or by object type. This usually doesn't work if you have objects with the same name in different schemas. Okay, but I'm going to leave the default there. And then if you want, you can also set a maximum files per folder. keep things a little bit simpler if you need. All right, everything's ready to go, so I'll click on Start. And so Data Tools will now create the project and import the objects from the Northwind database. And it provides status information of what it's doing along the way. So you can see that the import of the database schema has started. This is a relatively simple schema, relatively small database, so it won't take all that long to do everything. All right, and it's finished. Notice that you get a summary of the import. If you wanted to go to that folder, you could look at that log file, and that's going to contain basically all of the information here within this dialog box. Okay, so I'll click on Finish and take a look at Solution Explorer. So as you can see, I now have a Northwind Updates project that's contained within a Northwind Updates solution. There's various properties and references, but the important stuff is here. Northwind has a single schema called DBO. It was created long before there was the ability to have different schemas within SQL Server. And so it's a very simple structure. But within that single schema, notice that we have all of the stored procedures, all of the tables, and all of the views. And notice that each object has its own .SQL script file. And so if I look at the definition for the categories table, you'll see that that opens up the table designer with the code that creates that table. Go back over here and look at stored procedures, employee sales by country, and there you can see the source code for that stored procedure. And same thing for views. There's the code that creates the invoices views, the existing invoices view within the Northwind database. So at this point, you have an existing project that mirrors the Northwind database, and you can start to make changes to the database objects. Once you have a database project and imported objects, you can start creating new objects and modifying existing database objects. Once you make any of these kinds of changes, the database will be out of sync with the original Northwind database. But Data Tools has the tools you need in order to explore the changes and apply updates to that database. The scenario here is that I want to make a simple change to an existing object in the Northwind project. Specifically, I want to change a property of a column within the categories table. Okay, so here I am within Solution Explorer. I'll double click on the categories table, which once again opens up the table designer. The change I want to make is to uncheck the allow nulls property here of the description column. This should be a safe change to make because all of the existing rows in the table have non-null values for the description. So I've made a change, so I want to save that change. Again, keep in mind that unlike the connected development, this is disconnected, so I want to save the change in order to save the updated .SQL file, because that's all I'm working with at this point. Okay, so we're good to go. Now I want to build my project. So I'll come back over here to Solution Explorer, right-click on Northwind Updates, and select Build. That opens up the output window, and it displays information about each build step that it performs. And I want to make sure that the build successfully completed. As you can see, build 1 succeeded or up to date, 0 failed, 0 skipped. Keep in mind that I can have multiple projects in a single solution. And so there may be multiple database projects, maybe some SQL CLR code as well as some other things that all need to be built before I deploy the project. But most importantly here, this is going to reveal if I've made any mistakes in my code, any syntactical errors, any inconsistencies, or whatever. Then Data Tools will catch those, and I'll be able to go into Error List and see what the problems are. All right, now I want to compare the database project to the existing Northwind database. So I'm going to come up here to SQL and select Schema Compare, and create a new schema comparison. I need to select source and target databases, so I'll select source. And in this case, I want the source to be the database project. I only have a single project within the solution open, and so I'll select Northwind Updates. But if I had multiple projects within the solution, they'd all be listed there and I'd have to select one. All right, I'll click on OK, and now I have that option for the source database selected. Now I need to select a target and click on Select Target. And in this case, I want to compare it to an existing database, so I'll leave the Database Radio button selected and select a connection to the Northwind database. If I needed to, I can edit the connection or create a new connection, whatever I need to do. And I'll click on OK, and so now the target database drop-down list is populated. And I'll perform the comparison. So it'll take a few moments to load the source and target schemas, and then perform the comparison. Now you can see the difference between comparing an empty database to an existing database versus creating a project, importing the database objects, and then making simple changes. So the only change it found, as indicated by this pencil, is that the categories table changed. And this exists in both the project and the Northwind database, and so both of these are populated. And down here I can compare the code. Here within the project, description is not null, but in the existing database, description is nullable. And you can examine the rest of the code. As you can see, there's a non-clustered index on the category name. But that hasn't changed, so we don't need to worry about that. Now at this point, you could create a script to apply the change, or you could publish the project to make the same change. The important thing here is that the database project is now out of sync with the original Northwind database. But you have the tools both to see the state of each as well as to make changes in either direction.